I grew up believing our land was quiet, not peaceful quiet. There's a difference. Peace is something you feel. Quiet is something that watches you. I didn't understand that distinction until the night I was 9 years old and heard someone whisper my name from the tree line. That was the first time I realized the silence here wasn't empty. It was listening. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To tell this story right, I need to start with the moment everything changed. And that moment came on a morning so ordinary it should have meant nothing. Instead, it became the last truly normal day of my life. My name is Evan Rourke, and this is the true story of the 6 unbreakable rules my family follows on our isolated land. A place where the sun sets faster than it should, where shadows lean toward the house instead of away from it, and where something older than anyone alive still honors an agreement made long before I was born. The day it all began, I followed my usual routine. Coffee so strong it felt like a challenge. Eggs fried too crispy because that's the only way Dad ever cooked them, and a slow look out the kitchen window at the land stretching beyond our porch. Acres of golden grass, fences older than me, and the forest pressing close on 3 sides like a silent audience waiting for someone to misstep. From the outside, our home looked like any other farmhouse in the Midwest. But anyone who lived here long enough learned to notice the details. The way the trees never grew past a certain line, how animals refused to cross certain patches of earth, the fact that our wind chimes never made a sound on nights they should have been singing. That morning, Dad had left early for town, leaving me alone with my list of chores. Fix the northern fence line, check the water barrels, clear the brush from the western path. Simple tasks that kept the land from swallowing us whole. I pulled on my gloves and stepped into the crisp air, already feeling the day settling into its familiar rhythm. But even then, something felt off. The kind of subtle wrongness you can't name but can feel in your bones. The birds were awake, but their calls sounded softer, hesitant. The breeze that usually carried the smell of pine felt still, heavy, like the air was holding its breath. People think isolation dulls your senses. It does the opposite. It sharpens them until you notice every shift, every pause, every moment the world forgets to pretend it's normal. I walked the northern fence line, tightening wire, replacing staples, moving with muscle memory built from 23 years of routine. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Yet, every few minutes, I caught myself glancing toward the old Merrick property, the abandoned farmhouse half a mile east that hadn't seen a resident in nearly 15 years. The place had always unsettled me, not because it was haunted or rumored to be cursed, but because of what my dad always said whenever we passed it. Some land remembers its last owner too well. He never explained what that meant, and I never pressed him, but even as a kid, I understood one thing: whatever drove the Merricks away, it wasn't the weather. By 10 a.m., the sun had warmed the frost from the fence posts. My breath no longer puffed in white clouds, and my mind began drifting the way it always did when my hands were busy. I thought about the 6 rules, how most families pass down recipes or heirlooms. Mine passed down survival protocols, and unlike most heirlooms, ours couldn't be ignored. Rule 1. Never leave the property after sunset. Rule 2. If you hear knocking after 2 a.m., ignore it. Rule 3. Do not enter the old granary. Rule 4. If a man in a suit approaches, tell him to leave immediately. Rule 5. Never take anything from the woods. Rule 6. If lost, stop moving and wait for the antlered guardian. I know how insane that list sounds, but to us, it was as natural as brushing our teeth. When you grow up living with rules like that, you learn not to question them, not because you're scared, but because you've seen enough to respect what you don't understand. My father, Clint Rourke, taught me those rules with a seriousness other dads reserved for teaching their sons how to drive or throw a baseball. And maybe that's why he picked this life for us, because he knew guardianship wasn't something you chose. It was something you inherited. I tightened the last bolt on the fence and leaned back, stretching sore shoulders. The sun caught the metal wire in a flash of cold light, bright enough to sting my eyes. I blinked, and in that brief moment of blindness, I heard it. A voice, soft, distant, carried on a breeze that hadn't existed a second earlier. Evan, my name. Not shouted, not whispered, spoken the way someone calls a child inside for supper. Calm, familiar, wrong. I spun toward the sound, heart leaping into my throat. The forest beyond our land stood still and dark, the trees forming a wall of shadow. No wind, no movement, no one there. Except something was there. I knew it. A presence lingering just beyond the tree line, watching the way a person watches a door they expect someone to walk through. And then, just as quickly as it came, the feeling evaporated. The air went silent again. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wiped sweat from my forehead despite the morning chill, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. Because that wasn't the first time something out here had spoken my name. I just didn't expect it to start again after all these years. I turned back to the fence, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Something had shifted. Something was waking up, and I had no idea that, by the end of the day, the life I thought I understood would be gone forever. What I also didn't know was that the Merrick property, the place that had been abandoned for over a decade, was no longer empty. A car would arrive within the hour. A woman named Laura Mercer would step out carrying nothing but suitcases and a quiet determination. And her arrival, innocent as it seemed, would break a balance that had held for more than a century. But before all that happened, before the knocking returned, before the rules failed, before I discovered what my family truly was, I stood alone by the fence, dirt under my boots, surrounded by land that knew more secrets than any living person. And for the first time in years, it called my name. If you're still here listening, I promise you this. What you're about to hear is real. It's terrifying in places, beautiful in others, and it's haunted my family for generations. But if you want more stories like this, if you want to hear what really happened after that morning, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep telling these stories, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this one ends. By late morning, the uneasy feeling had settled deeper into my chest, not sharp or sudden, but low and persistent. The way a cold creeps into your bones before you realize the temperature has dropped. I'd lived on this land long enough to trust those instincts. They weren't paranoia. They were survival. I finished the fence repairs and slung my tools over my shoulder, heading back toward the house. The path cut between tall grasses that swayed without any wind, the blades brushing against my jeans like fingers trailing across fabric. For a moment, I felt watched again, but when I turned, nothing moved except the grass. The silence pressed in all around me. Too complete, too deliberate, I pushed forward, telling myself the same thing Dad always said when the land felt off. Stay focused on what's real, and the unreal will lose interest. I didn't fully believe that, but it kept me moving. Halfway to the house, something shifted in the corner of my vision movement near the old Merrick property. I stopped mid-step. It was different this time, real, tangible. The dusty road leading to the abandoned farmhouse shimmered under the sunlight. And then, emerging through the heat haze, a small blue sedan turned onto the overgrown driveway. I froze. No one came out here, no one. The Merrick house had been empty since I was a kid, and not the kind of empty that comes with for sale signs or curious visitors. It was the kind of empty created by stories no one wanted to talk about. Stories whispered by adults who lowered their voices when kids got too close. Stories that made you sleep with the curtains closed tight. The car rolled to a stop in front of the sagging porch. Birds scattered from the roof in a sudden burst of wings. Even from a distance, I could feel the land react like it was bracing itself. A woman stepped out of the driver's seat. She was in her early 30s, maybe, with auburn hair pulled into a messy bun and a look on her face that mixed determination with exhaustion. She paused, hands on her hips, surveying the property like someone assessing the starting point of a long, uphill climb. Boxes filled the back seat. A rolled-up mattress was strapped to the roof. Everything about her posture suggested she wasn't here for a quick visit. She was moving in. My stomach tightened. I didn't know her, but I already knew she had no idea what she had just stepped into. I almost jogged back to the house, but forced myself to walk. Rushing meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. And on this land, mistakes could echo for a long, long time. Dad's truck wasn't in the driveway yet, so I washed my hands at the outdoor spigot and tightened the loose hinge on the screen door, trying to keep busy while my mind churned. Outsiders weren't forbidden, not exactly, but their presence had consequences. The rules weren't designed for strangers. They barely worked for us. The wind finally picked up, but instead of cooling the air, it carried the faint, sweet smell of cedar, an aroma that only came from deep inside the forest, far past the point where sunlight reached the ground. When that scent drifted across our land, Dad always said the same thing: something's shifting. He wasn't here to say it now, but I felt it just the same. I walked to the edge of the yard and looked across the waving grass at the Merrick house. The woman was dragging a suitcase up the porch steps, her movements slow but steady. There was a bravery in her posture, the kind that comes from someone who's been hurt before and is determined not to be hurt again. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But I knew this: people only move into isolation when they're running from something: loss, pain, failure, grief. And unfortunately, running into this place meant meeting things no one deserved to face. I headed inside to make lunch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the land was reacting to her arrival. The house felt different, not unnerving, just altered, the same way a room feels when someone else's energy lingers inside it. I ate in silence, chewing mechanically while my brain replayed the image of the woman stepping out of the car, determined, worn down, completely unaware. The clock above the sink ticked louder than usual. Every second felt like a countdown. One of the 6 rules pulsed in my mind louder than the rest. Rule 1. Never leave the property after sunset. It wasn't phrased as a warning. It was phrased as a fact. Something happened beyond our borders when the sky went dark, something that didn't tolerate trespassers. And now someone new lived right on the edge of that line. I finished washing my dishes and caught myself staring out the kitchen window again. Habit, maybe, or instinct. Because what I saw nearly made me drop the plate in my hands. On the edge of the Merrick porch, standing just behind the woman, was a figure, not close enough to touch her, but close enough to watch her. Tall, skinny, too still, human shape, but wrong somehow. A trick of the light, a shadow. My heart hit hard against my ribs. I leaned closer to the glass. The woman blinked against the sun, then looked at something in her hands. When she lifted her head again, the figure was gone. Not walked away. Gone. Just vanished. I stepped back from the window so fast my heel hit the baseboard. I sucked in a breath, forcing myself to steady. It could have been anything. A tree branch, a piece of debris, a trick of the heat. Except I'd lived here long enough to know what tricks felt like. This wasn't one. I wasn't imagining things. Something had been standing on her porch. By early afternoon, Dad's truck finally pulled into our driveway. He climbed out slower than usual, his work boots crunching on the gravel, his eyes fixed on the Merrick property before I even said a word. "You saw it too," I said. "I saw enough," he replied, voice tight. "More than I wanted to." The air shifted again. A cold breeze drifted between us, stirring the dust at our feet. Someone moved in. "I know. Dad, what do we do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out across the land, jaw clenched, hands on his hips. A posture he only used when trouble was close. "We keep to the rules," he finally said, "and we pray she stays on her side of the boundary. But she doesn't know the rules. That's the problem," he muttered. "Ignorance gets people hurt out here." We stood there, a long moment, father and son, side by side, with the weight of something old and patient pressing down on both of us. Dad's shoulders carried decades of knowledge he refused to share because he believed secrets protected more than they harmed. I wasn't so sure anymore. "Evan," he said slowly, voice low. Whatever you saw, don't acknowledge it. Not with your eyes, not with your mind, not with your words. You hear me? I hear you. But even as I said it, my gaze drifted back toward the Merrick house, toward the woman unpacking her life onto land that didn't want company. And for the first time in years, I felt the rules tremble. Dad headed toward the tool shed a few minutes later, pretending to busy himself with a task he hadn't planned on doing today. That was his way of managing fear, by giving his hands something to do. But even from across the yard, I could see the stiffness in his shoulders, the tension in the way he walked. He wasn't calm. He wasn't indifferent. He was worried, deeply worried. And when Clint Rourke worried, something was truly wrong. I stayed on the porch, watching him disappear around the side of the house. The boards under my boots creaked as I shifted my weight, the old wood groaning softly like it was tired of carrying secrets. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding and leaned against the railing. From here, I had a clear view of the Merrick house. The woman was still unloading her car, carrying a cardboard box up the steps and setting it near the doorway. She paused, catching her breath, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes scanning the horizon the way newcomers always do when they first realize how far they are from everything. It's a particular kind of loneliness, moving out here. A loneliness that sneaks up on you, deepens you, strips away noise until all that's left is the sound of your own breathing. She didn't seem afraid yet, but everyone looks brave until the first night falls. A distant hum drifted across the field. It was soft, low, almost vibrating. I frowned, leaning forward. It wasn't wind or insects. It was too steady, too deliberate, the kind of sound that didn't belong. And then it stopped, just cut off. I straightened, heart ticking faster. Something stirred inside the tree line, branches rustling in a pattern that didn't match any natural rhythm. The movement was slow, almost thoughtful, like fingers brushing leaves aside. But when I blinked, the branches were still. The woman didn't seem to notice. She opened her front door, struggling with its swollen frame, and carried the box inside. The moment she crossed that threshold, the air shifted again, heavier, thicker, charged. My breathing stalled as a sudden image flashed through my mind, an old photograph I hadn't thought about in years. Me at 8 years old, standing in the same spot I was standing now, staring across this exact field at the Merrick house. Except back then, there had been movement. Back then, I'd seen a shape in the window. Not a person, not an animal, something in between. At 8, I'd convinced myself it was imagination. Dad had even nodded, relieved, and said, "Good, keep it that way." Now, though, the memory hit with a clarity that made my stomach twist. I pushed away from the railing and started walking toward the fence line separating our property from the Merrick place. Not too close, never too close, but close enough to see her porch clearly. I told myself I only wanted to make sure she wasn't doing anything dangerous. That's what I repeated in my head. But underneath that excuse was something else. Curiosity, fear, and a growing sense that everything was shifting faster than we could prepare for. The grass brushed my jeans as I walked, whispering against the fabric. A thin cloud passed over the sun, dimming the field in a subtle, eerie wash of shadow. And then I saw it. Footprints. Fresh ones. They weren't hers. They were far too long, too narrow, and the spacing was wrong, like someone with an unnatural gait had walked the perimeter of her porch. And they weren't leading to her house. They were leading away from it. But I hadn't seen anyone leave. I crouched near the fence, studying the impressions with a tight throat. The earth around them was slightly indented, not enough to reveal weight, but enough to reveal intention. Someone or something had been there, watching her unpack, standing close enough to touch her if it wanted to. A sharp jolt of unease crawled up my spine. Behind me, the screen door slammed as Dad stepped outside. I didn't turn. I felt his presence stop a few feet back, the gravel crunch quieting under his boots. "You shouldn't be this close," he said. I needed to see. "You saw enough." The air between us felt like a boundary itself, thin, fragile, humming with things unsaid. She's going to need help, I said. She can't live there alone. Dad didn't reply. I stood and finally faced him. His expression wasn't angry, it was resigned. She won't listen, he said quietly. People never do, not until it's too late. That doesn't mean we ignore her. She's not our responsibility. The words hit like a slap, but not because they were cruel, because they were familiar. Dad had said them once before, when a hunter wandered too far into the woods years ago and came back without memory of how he'd gotten lost. Dad had called the sheriff, handed the man over, then shut the door and said those same 6 words. Not our responsibility, but something inside me rejected that idea now. Maybe because I'd seen the figure on her porch. Maybe because something whispered my name hours earlier. Maybe because I had a bad feeling, a very bad feeling that her arrival wasn't random. Almost as if the land had allowed her in, or drawn her in. She doesn't know the rules, I said. Dad looked away, jaw tightening. And we're not going to teach her. Why not? Because once someone knows the rules, he said, voice low, the land expects them to follow them, and if they don't, he shook his head. It's worse than ignorance. I thought about the 6 rules, about the voice calling my name, about the footprint leading away from her porch, about the stillness in the wind earlier, the sweet cedar smell, the shifting air. Something was building, something old, something patient, and now something new had entered its territory. Dad walked back to the house without another word. I stayed where I was, staring across the field as the woman reappeared in her doorway, wiping sweat from her forehead, unaware of how close danger had already passed her. A single crow landed on the roof of her house, cocked its head, and stared at her with a disturbingly human stillness. She waved it away, oblivious. The crow didn't move, not until she turned her back. Then, with a sudden jerk of motion, it snapped its head toward the tree line, as if acknowledging something hidden just beyond sight. A shadow shifted in the woods, a slow ripple of darkness spreading vertically, like a figure unfurling behind the trees. Then it disappeared again. My pulse hammered so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. The land wasn't just reacting, it was awakening. I didn't know it then, not fully, but that afternoon would be the last time the 6 rules felt like simple guidelines. Within days, they would become the only thing standing between life and something far, far older than fear. And as I stood at the fence line, watching a stranger make herself at home where no one should ever call home, I realized one undeniable truth. Something out here had been waiting, and now it wasn't waiting anymore. By the next morning, the unease from the day before hadn't faded. It had thickened, like fog clinging to my ribs from the inside. Sleep had been thin and restless, made worse by the strange quiet that settled over the house sometime around 2 a.m. Normally, the quiet meant the knocker would arrive on schedule. But that night, nothing came. No knocks, no taps, not even the creak of settling wood. And the absence of something that always happened was somehow worse than the thing itself. I woke before sunrise, shirt damp with sweat, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed overnight. Something subtle, but massive, like a shift in the ground that you can't detect until your footing fails. I dressed quickly and stepped outside onto the porch, blinking against the early gray light. The air was crisp, but unmoving. Even the insects were silent. Then, from across the field, a faint glow bloomed inside the Merrick house, warm, golden light from a lamp. She was awake. Her presence on this land felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not wrong because she didn't belong, but wrong because the land didn't know what to do with her yet. And if the land didn't know, then neither did the things that lived within its boundaries. By the time I finished breakfast, I saw movement near her porch. She stepped outside carrying a metal thermos, sipping from it as she surveyed her yard with a tired determination that struck deeper than I expected. She wasn't the type to scare easily, that much was obvious from her posture alone, but I also recognized the subtle heaviness in her expression. She hadn't slept well either. Maybe she'd felt something last night. Maybe she'd heard something. Or maybe she'd seen something. At 8 a.m., I headed toward the southern line to check the water troughs, partly because it needed doing, partly because it gave me an excuse to skirt closer to the boundary between our properties. The grass was damp with dew, soaking into my boots as I crossed the open field. The Merrick house came into view again, clearer now in the brightening light. She knelt near her car, rummaging through a plastic bin of tools, hammers, cords, a cracked toolbox. She seemed frustrated, tossing items aside before fishing out a wrench that looked older than she was. "You planning on fixing that whole house with one wrench?" I called out. She startled, nearly dropping it. When she turned toward my voice, I saw her face clearly for the first time, in daylight, freckled, tired, but with eyes that held a spark of stubborn resilience. "Morning," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Didn't see you there." "Evan," I said, tapping the fence post beside me. "We talked yesterday. Welcome to the middle of nowhere." "Right, Evan." She managed a small smile, thin at the edges, but genuine. "I'm Laura. And yes, apparently I bought a house that requires more tools than I own. But it's nothing I can't handle." "Nothing you can't handle yet," I corrected softly. She squinted, not quite catching the tone. "That sounds like a warning." "It's advice. This land has a learning curve." "Well," she said, straightening, "I've never backed down from a learning curve." Her confidence was admirable and completely misplaced. I noticed something then, a discoloration on the wood of the porch behind her. It looked like water damage at first glance, until the shape sharpened in my mind. Not water, not rot. A print, a palm print, but far too long, far too narrow. My stomach tightened. She hadn't seen it, not yet. Before I could say anything, Laura took a step closer to the fence. Not enough to break boundaries, but enough that I saw the exhaustion more clearly under her eyes. "Let me ask you something," she said quietly. "Last night, did you hear anything unusual?" I kept my expression neutral. "Unusual how?" She hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. "I heard footsteps," she said finally. "Around the house, slow ones, not animals. And around 1 in the morning, something tapped on my window. Just once, like a knuckle." My chest tightened. "Not the knocker. The knocker always came at 2 a.m. and always knocked 9 times in its 3-3-3 pattern. This was something else." "You sure it wasn't a tree branch?" I asked, though my pulse already knew the truth. "There are no trees close enough," she said. "And it wasn't random. It felt intentional." Her eyes searched mine for confirmation, for a sign she wasn't losing her mind. And I wanted God. I wanted to tell her she wasn't. But the rules weren't flexible. They weren't a suggestion. They were a pact forged long before either of us existed. "I didn't hear anything," I lied. The disappointment in her face hit harder than it should have. But disappointment was safer than knowledge. Knowledge had a cost she wasn't ready to pay. She looked down, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Sorry, I just thought maybe I imagined it." "You'll get used to the noises out here," I said gently. "Houses settle. Animals move around. Coyotes wander close some nights." She nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. A breeze stirred, then the first real movement in the air since dawn. It carried the scent of cedar again, faint but unmistakable. The smell was never random. It always meant something was shifting inside the woods. Laura glanced toward the tree line. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly. "Quiet. Peaceful." "Quiet, yes. But not peace. You'll appreciate the quiet more once you understand it," I said. "It isn't here to comfort you. It's here to test you." She frowned, unsure whether I was joking. I wasn't. Before either of us could say more, a sharp crack echoed from the tree line like a heavy branch snapping under weight. Laura jolted. I stiffened. That wasn't wind or wildlife. That was deliberate movement. The air grew still again, the silence now edged with something sharper. Watching, waiting. "Probably a deer," I said, though I knew damn well no deer snapped branches like that. Laura's eyes lingered on the woods longer than I liked. Something had caught her attention, something she couldn't name, and then, without warning, she spoke the words I dreaded more than anything. "I think I'll take a walk into the woods tomorrow," she said, "just to explore a bit." Every nerve in my body went cold. Rule 5. Never take anything from the woods. Never enter them without cause. "No," I said too quickly. "Don't, seriously." Her eyebrows rose. "Why, is it private land?" "It's not. That kind of boundary." "What kind then?" I searched for an excuse, any excuse, but the truth curled inside my throat like a secret ready to burn its way out. "All you need to know," I said slowly, "is that the woods don't give back what they take." The breeze died again. Laura studied me, expression caught between curiosity and unease. "I feel like you're not telling me something important," she said. I looked toward the forest, pulse hammering. I wasn't telling her something important. I wasn't telling her something that could save her life. Laura didn't push the question any further, but I saw the shift in her expression, the tightening around her eyes, the faint purse of her lips. She wasn't convinced, and worse, she wasn't deterred. Some people back away from mystery, others step toward it. Laura Mercer, unfortunately, seemed like the second kind. I forced myself to keep calm, to breathe evenly, to maintain the kind of steady composure Dad always said was essential on this land. Fear attracts attention. Curiosity invites trouble. Panic is practically a beacon. "I should get back to my chores," I said, taking a step back from the fence. "If you need anything, tools, advice, just call from your side of the boundary. We'll help if we can." Her eyes flicked down to the faint footprints near her porch, the ones she still hadn't quite recognized for what they were. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "I really do." I nodded and turned away, but before I took a second step, she called out again. "Evan?" I stopped. "Do you ever feel like you're being watched out here?" The question hit harder because she delivered it in a quiet, almost embarrassed tone. Not theatrical fear, not dramatics. Genuine uncertainty, genuine vulnerability, and it made the hair rise on my arms. "Sometimes," I said truthfully, without turning around. "But it's not always something to fear." "What is it then?" I hesitated. "Something that notices, something that remembers." She didn't answer, and I didn't give her a chance to, because if I stayed any longer, I'd end up saying too much. I walked back toward my side of the property, feeling her eyes on my back until I reached the shed and closed myself inside. Inside the dim, dusty shed, surrounded by old tools and the faint scent of engine oil, I let myself exhale fully. My pulse was still too fast. My mind wouldn't slow. Someone moving into the Merrick house was a problem. But Laura Mercer asking the right questions this early? That was worse. I was sorting through a crate of bolts when Dad's voice drifted through the open window behind me. "She's curious." I didn't jump. Dad never startled anyone, unless he meant to. But I did turn around, surprised to see him standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, gaze fixed not on me but on the Merrick house. "You were watching?" I asked. "Always do when someone new shows up." His tone was even, but his jaw tightened as he said it. "She's already asking the kind of questions that get people hurt. She heard something last night." He closed his eyes just for a second, but when he opened them again, they were sharp, focused. "What did she hear?" "Footsteps. A tap on the window." Dad muttered a string of words under his breath, so quiet I barely caught them. A prayer or a curse. Hard to tell with him. "That's early," he said. "Too early." I didn't need clarification. The first night is usually quiet, observational, a test without pressure. For activity to reach her windows already meant someone or something wanted to speed things up. "Should we warn her?" I asked. Dad turned his gaze on me, eyes hard but not unkind. "What exactly would you like us to say, Evan?" "Welcome to the neighborhood. Don't enter the woods. Don't acknowledge the knocking. And if a man in a suit shows up, tell him to leave before he rearranges your thoughts." She'd call the sheriff and have us committed. He wasn't wrong. Truth presented at the wrong time becomes madness. "So we do nothing?" I asked. We observe, Dad corrected. We watch for boundary shifts. We reinforce the markers. And we pray she has the sense to stay inside after dark. The phrase lingered, stay inside after dark. It wasn't fear-mongering. It was fact. Later that afternoon, while I checked the irrigation lines near the southern path, I heard her again. Laura's voice carried faintly across the field on the still air. She was on her porch, talking on her phone, a detail that struck me because cell service rarely worked this deep into the land. But I caught enough to understand. No, I'm fine, she said. Yes, last night was weird, but I'm just adjusting. I needed a change. A pause. No, Darren, I don't want to talk about the divorce again. I'm here because I want to be here. Her tone twisted frustration, hurt, resolve. When she ended the call, the silence that followed felt strangely intimate, like hearing someone take off armor they'd worn too long. But then something happened that froze me in place. Laura stepped off her porch and walked toward the woods. Not far, not enough to break Rule 5. But she walked toward them, eyes fixed on the tree line like she was drawn to it. The moment she reached the edge of the tall grass, the wind stopped. Completely. The land didn't want her there. Before I could call out to her, she reached down and plucked a wildflower from the grass. Just a small white bloom, delicate, harmless looking. A simple gesture, but my blood ran cold. She'd taken something. Rule 5 wasn't just about entering the woods. It was about taking anything the land didn't freely give. And the wildflower she held now wasn't one of ours. They only grew near the forest line. That patch of grass wasn't neutral ground. It was the edge of a territory she didn't understand. She lifted the flower to her face, curious, almost tender. And then the trees behind her shuddered, not from wind, from movement. Something shifted between the trunks. A ripple of shadow traveling in a straight line, not random, not natural, directly behind her. She didn't notice, but I did. I started walking fast, crossing the yard with long strides, heart hammering. Laura was still examining the flower when I reached the fence and called her name. Laura, she startled, dropping the wildflower. The moment it hit the ground, the movement in the trees stopped. All at once, as if something froze in place. Her brows pinched. Evan, is everything okay? I forced my expression neutral, calm, controlled. You shouldn't wander near the trees, I said. The ground's uneven. People twist ankles out here all the time. A partial truth. A safe truth. I wasn't wandering, she said, just looking. The woods are beautiful. Beautiful wasn't the word. The woods didn't invite beauty. They invited caution. She crouched to pick up the flower again. Leave it, I said, too sharp, too quickly. She looked up at me with confusion. Why? Think, Evan, think. They're poisonous to some animals, I lied. Better not carry them around. She hesitated, then let it drop. The tension in my shoulders loosened just enough to breathe again. But when I glanced back at the tree line, I saw it. A face, too pale, too high above the ground, leaning slightly between two trees, watching us, not hiding, just watching. And the moment I blinked, it slipped backward into the deeper darkness, smooth, silent, patient, waiting. Evan? Laura asked softly. You look like you saw a ghost. Not a ghost. Something worse. Just. Long day, I said. You should get inside before sunset. It's barely 4. I know, but trust me. She didn't trust me yet. That much was obvious. But she would. Because soon, the land would introduce itself to her in ways she couldn't ignore. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept finding reasons to stay outside, checking the fence again, clearing debris from the south path, tightening bolts that didn't need tightening, anything to keep my eyes on the Merrick house without making it obvious. Laura moved through her new home like someone determined to rebuild her life from the inside out, carrying boxes, sweeping dust from the porch, wiping windows clouded by years of neglect. There was something admirable about her persistence, something brave. But bravery and ignorance look the same right before disaster hits. A little before sunset, Dad stepped out of the house and walked over to me. his face set in the kind of stern calm that always preceded a lecture or a command. "You've been watching her all day," he said. "She shouldn't be alone. She moved here by choice. Doesn't mean she understands where she moved." Dad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We've done this before, Evan. We've seen newcomers come and go. They always leave. She doesn't seem like she's going anywhere. That's what worries me." He scanned the tree line the way he always did, slowly, methodically, like a man checking a perimeter he'd memorized over decades. "The land is changing," he said. "You feel it too." I nodded. "And when the land changes, the rules matter more than ever." His eyes locked onto mine with a seriousness I rarely saw. Not fear, but responsibility weighted by generations. "I need you to stay aware, but I also need you to stay separate. You understand? Do not get involved with her any more than necessary. What if she gets into trouble?" "She will," he said simply. "That's the pattern. Outsiders don't listen. They test boundaries because they don't believe in the things we've seen." "And then?" I asked quietly. Dad's jaw tightened. "Then the land decides what to do with them." A chill worked its way down my spine. Dad wasn't cruel. He wasn't heartless. But he believed in the rules more than he believed in people. And I wasn't sure he was wrong. The first stars began to appear overhead, faint pinpricks in the darkening sky. Sunset was minutes away. "Come inside," Dad said. "No more wandering." I should have listened. I should have followed him inside. But something compelled me to stay out for a few seconds longer, just long enough to glance toward the Merrick property one last time. Laura stood on her porch, hugging a sweater around herself as she looked out over her land. Something in her posture, slightly hunched, arms wrapped tight, told me she was fighting a sense of unease she didn't understand yet. She scanned the field, looked toward the woods, then toward our house, as if searching for something familiar in a place that didn't offer comfort. The breeze shifted again, gentle at first. Then it stopped entirely. Every sound disappeared. The insects, the birds, even the faint rustle of grass. Silence swallowed everything, thick and absolute. I knew that silence. I'd learned to fear it as a child. Something was moving, slowly, quietly, purposefully. My chest tightened. I stepped back toward my porch, eyes fixed on the space behind Laura's house, where the woods pressed closest to her back door. The air darkened, not from clouds, but from something shifting between the trees. A mass of shadow that didn't match the shape of any natural object. It elongated, then shrank, then elongated again, like something figuring out how to stand. Laura didn't see it. She stared straight ahead, unaware of the shape growing taller behind her house. "Evan?" Dad called sharply from inside. "Inside. Now." But my feet wouldn't move. I watched as the shadow leaned outward, stretching its form in slow, unnatural fluidity, then snapped, still rigid like it sensed it was being seen. My breath caught. The shadow recoiled. Not backwards, sideways, into the darkness between the trunks. Gone. Just like that, but the silence didn't lift. If anything, it thickened. Laura rubbed her arms, shivering, then stepped inside her house and shut the door. The porch light flickered twice before settling into a steady glow. Only then did the sound return, the faint chirp of a cricket, the rustle of a breeze, the whispering hum of the fields. But the moment the silence broke, something else began. A knock, not at our house, at hers. Soft, uncertain at first. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. It was too early. The knocker came at 2 a.m., not sunset. And it never visited outsiders. Not like this. Not uninvited. I stood rooted to the ground as the knocking grew louder. Knock, knock, knock. This was no pattern, no rhythm, no ritual. This was probing, testing, learning her boundaries. Knock, knock, knock. "Evan!" Dad shouted from inside, voice sharp with urgency I rarely heard. Inside. Now, this time, I obeyed. I ran up the steps and slammed the door behind me. Dad grabbed my arm the moment I crossed the threshold. "You do not go back outside tonight," he said. Not a command, a plea. We both stood still, listening. From across the field, faint through the thickening evening air, the knocking continued. Heavy, persistent, growing more confident with each strike. Dad shut off the lights. Not because of the knocking, but because something had responded to it. A low hum drifted from the woods, a deep, resonant vibration that made the windowpanes tremble. My heartbeat stuttered. Dad looked at me with a grim expression. "They're awake," he said. That night, I couldn't see the Merrick house from my window, not clearly, but I could see the flicker of her lights turning on and off, hear the echoes of movement across her porch, feel the land bracing for something none of us were ready for. She'd called attention. She'd drawn eyes. And once the land noticed you, it didn't forget. Near midnight, the knocking stopped. But the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was anticipation. Laura Mercer had arrived less than 48 hours ago, and already the rules were shifting around her. The balance was breaking. Whatever lived in the woods was pushing forward, and whether she knew it or not, she had already stepped into a story that had been waiting generations to continue. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me in small creaks and sighs that should have felt familiar but didn't. Every sound felt magnified, sharper, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And beneath all of it, under the stillness and the ordinary noises, was something else. A pulse. Not a literal heartbeat, more like a vibration under the earth. A hum so faint it only existed in the space between hearing and feeling. The kind of sensation you don't notice unless you're raised on land that teaches you to recognize it. Something was awake. Something was moving. And it wasn't finished with Laura. Around 12:40 a.m., I finally sat up and pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to push back the fog of exhaustion. Outside my window, the Merrick house glowed dimly through the trees. One light on, then two, then three, as if she were walking room to room, checking for an intruder she couldn't explain. A soft thud sounded from downstairs. My body tensed before my mind even reacted. Footsteps, slow, intentional, heavy. They moved through the kitchen, then paused beneath my room. Dad. I recognized his gait, the deliberate, weighted steps of a man who'd spent his whole life walking through danger disguised as routine. I climbed out of bed, careful not to make noise, and cracked my door open. A strip of warm yellow light spilled from the hallway. Dad stood near the front window, arms crossed, body tense. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You're awake. You too," I whispered. He didn't respond. Not at first. His gaze remained fixed on the Merrick place across the field. Then he said something that chilled me more than anything else that night. "It's too early for this." "For what?" I asked, stepping beside him. "For escalation." He lifted a pair of old binoculars and scanned Laura's house. The windows flickered with movement, shadows darting, lights switching on and off in rapid succession, like she was pacing or searching for something. "What's happening to her?" I asked. Dad lowered the binoculars, his expression grim. "She's attracting attention." "What kind of attention?" "The kind we've spent generations trying to contain." I swallowed hard. The hum under the earth deepened slightly, a bass note too low for human ears, but felt through the soles of the feet. I couldn't stand still anymore. Something in me pulled toward the door, an instinct stronger than fear. "I need to help her," I said. Dad grabbed my wrist before I could take a step, hard. "You break rule 1, you die. You understand me. Nothing out there at night is your concern." "That's not true," I said, pulling my hand free. "She's alone. She doesn't know the rules. If something's happening to her, we can't." "Yes, we can," Dad cut in sharply. "And we will. We follow the rules. That's how this land stays balanced. But it's already unbalanced." Dad's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something closer to fear. Fear of what this meant. Fear of what was coming. "Evan," he said, quieter now, "there are things older than us that wait for cracks in the boundaries. If you go out there tonight, you'll become one of those cracks." A sudden slam echoed through the night. Both of us froze. Not from our house. From hers. The Merrick back door. Another slam. louder. Metal rattling against its hinges, window glass vibrating in the wooden frames. Dad exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging in resignation. "It's starting," he whispered. "What's starting?" I pressed, but instead of answering, he handed me the binoculars. "Look." I lifted them toward Laura's house. The moment I looked through the lenses, my breath caught. She wasn't pacing. She was blocking doors. She dragged a chair under one knob, shoved a dresser against another, pushed a kitchen table across the floor to barricade a hallway. Her face was pale, her movements frantic, her hands trembling. Something was inside her house, something she was trying to contain. She darted across the living room, glancing over her shoulder with wide, terrified eyes. As she passed a window, I saw it, a shape, too tall, too thin, pressed against the glass from the outside. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, its fingers tapping lightly, not knocking, but testing, mapping the weakness in the barrier she'd created. Tap, tap, tap. I nearly dropped the binoculars. "What is that?" I whispered. Dad didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence told me everything. The entity wasn't one we'd dealt with. It wasn't the knocker. It wasn't the suited man. It wasn't anything in our journals or rules. This was new, and new meant dangerous. A sudden cry burst from the Merrick house, Laura's voice, raw and desperate. She yelled something I couldn't make out. A plea, maybe, or a name, or a prayer. Then, a crash. Wood splintered, glass shattered. She screamed. Every instinct in my body pushed me toward the door. I stepped forward. Dad's hand slammed into the doorframe beside me, blocking my path. "No, she needs help. You can't go out there. We can't just listen to her die." His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Evan, if you go out there now, you won't save her. You'll only invite them here." Then the floorboards upstairs creaked. We both froze. Something was moving inside our house. Not footsteps. Weight. Settling. Like something stepping carefully across the old wooden boards. Slowly. Purposefully. It stopped above us in the hallway between our bedrooms. My breath caught. Dad's face turned stone hard. "They're testing," he said. "Both houses at once." And then, in a whisper so soft it almost wasn't sound, the thing upstairs spoke. Not words, just one sound. A low, drawn-out moan. Long, hollow, hungry. I took a step back involuntarily. Dad moved in front of me, shoulders squared, jaw tight. "It's not here for you," he whispered. "Not yet." Another crash echoed from Laura's house. She screamed again, higher this time, desperate, scared beyond the point where instinct protects you. Something inside me fractured at the sound. I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't be passive while someone fought for her life 50 yards away. "Dad," I said, voice shaking. "She's going to die." He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the staircase, where the shadow of something long and thin stretched across the floor. And then he whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. Someone always does when new blood arrives. My pulse hammered, throat tight. This wasn't balance. This wasn't protection. This was sacrifice. This was tradition rusted into cruelty, and I wasn't willing to accept it anymore. "Dad," I said, stepping back. "I'm not letting her face that alone." He turned toward me, eyes wide with fury and fear. "Evan," but I didn't hear the rest, because at that moment, Laura's scream cut through the night like a blade. Not just fear, terror. The kind that strips a person down to nothing but survival instinct. And something else in her voice. Something that sounded like surrender. I felt something ancient and electric ignite in my chest. A clarity I'd never known before. A sense of purpose so sharp it nearly hurt. I wasn't watching this happen. I was ending it. I didn't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was standing behind Dad, shaking with adrenaline and fear. And the next I was running toward the kitchen, heart pounding so violently it drowned out every other sound. The house felt alive around me, walls groaning, floorboards shifting, beams settling in unnatural patterns like the structure itself was trying to warn me. But I couldn't stop. not with the echoes of Laura's last scream still vibrating in my skull. I made it 2 steps before Dad grabbed my arm, yanking me backward with more strength than I thought he still had. My spine collided with the wall, knocking the air out of me. "You step 1 foot outside this house, Evan, and you're dead," he hissed. "She's dying right now." I shot back, voice cracking under pressure I couldn't contain. "That is not your responsibility, but it should be." Dad's expression twisted not in anger, but something closer to pain. For a moment, I saw the truth behind his eyes, the loneliness of a man who had watched this land take more than it ever returned. "Please," he said quietly, one word he rarely used. "Please don't make me lose you too." That word hit me harder than any physical blow. Two. Someone he'd lost before, someone tied to the land, someone swallowed by it. But Laura screamed again, shorter this time, weaker, like she'd been cut off mid-breath. The sound tore through whatever restraint I had left. "I can't just stand here," I whispered. Dad followed my gaze to the door, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jump beneath his skin. "Breaking Rule 1 isn't bravery," he said. "It's suicide." "Maybe," I said, "but letting her die isn't survival. It's surrender." Before he could answer, something above us moved again. The creak wasn't careful this time. It was deliberate. One slow step, then another. The thing in the hallway shifted its weight, as if testing each board beneath it. The wood answered with long, protesting groans. Dust sifted down from the ceiling in small clouds. Dad's eyes flicked upward. "It's choosing," he whispered. "Choosing what?" I asked, though dread curled in my stomach, begging me not to hear the answer. "Which house to enter?" My pulse staggered. "You said it wasn't here for us." "It wasn't," he said, "until you decided to interfere." A cold wave rippled through me. The thing upstairs let out a sound low at first, then rising, stretching into a hollow, aching hum that vibrated through the floorboards, through my legs, through my ribs. It felt like grief, or hunger, or both. Then it began moving again, faster this time, more confident. I backed toward the door before I could stop myself. Adrenaline roaring in my ears. Dad grabbed my sleeve. "Don't. You can't outrun it." "I'm not trying to outrun it," I said. "I'm trying to outrun you." Before he could react, I twisted out of his grip and lunged for the door. My fingers closed around the handle, and for a moment the entire house seemed to lean inward, like it was holding its breath. Then I yanked the door open. Cold night air slammed into my face. Dad shouted my name behind me, but I was already outside, racing across the grass toward the faint glow of Laura's windows. Every step felt like a gamble against something I couldn't see. The air was too still. The ground vibrated faintly under my boots. Somewhere above me, the thing in our hallway dragged itself toward the stairs, making the railing rattle violently. But outside the rules were different. Outside was neutral ground. Sort of. My lungs burned as I sprinted, legs pumping harder than they'd ever moved. The Merrick house flickered in the darkness, lights flashing on and off like the building itself was panicking. Halfway across the field, I heard it. Footsteps behind me, but not Dad's. Not human. Too long between strides. Too heavy. I didn't dare look back. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run faster. I pushed harder, my boots tearing through the grass, breath ragged. "Laura," I yelled, though my voice felt swallowed by the night. Her porch came into view. Then her smashed front window. Then the toppled chair inside her living room. Something slammed against a wall in the back of her house so hard the siding shook. I reached her porch steps and took them 2 at a time, the boards groaning under my weight. The front door was barely hanging onto its hinge. Splinters fanned out around the frame like something had clawed at it. I shoved inside. Everything was wrong. The air was colder than any winter night I'd ever felt. Frost bloomed across the floorboards, spiderwebbing outward from the hallway. Furniture was overturned. The lights buzzed weakly overhead, and in the center of the living room, Laura stood with her back pressed against a wall, eyes wide with terror, a broken lamp clutched like a weapon. Her gaze snapped toward me. "Evan?" I rushed to her, Laura, come on, we need to go. She shook her head violently. It's in the house. I know. Her breath hitched. It spoke my name. A cold shiver shot through me. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge it. But it was already too late. We both heard the movement then. A dragging sound. Slow. Wet. Wrong. Coming from the kitchen. Laura trembled violently. What is that? I grabbed her wrist. We don't wait to find out. We moved toward the door, but before we reached it, a shadow stretched across the floor, long and thin, sliding beneath the light like spilled ink. Laura froze. Keep moving, I whispered. The shadow pulsed. Once, twice. Then it began rising, pulling itself upward until it cast a shape against the far wall. A figure, too tall, too distorted, head bent sideways, limbs hanging like broken branches. And then, it spoke, not in words, not in human sound, just a slow exhale, a breath that carried intent. Laura collapsed to her knees, hands over her ears. I stepped in front of her, heart slamming against my ribs, every instinct screaming to run. The shadow leaned forward, studying us, deciding. Then, a sound shattered the moment, a deep, resonant horn blast that shook the entire house. Not a car horn, not anything mechanical. It was older, wilder, like something out of a canyon or a dream. The shadow recoiled instantly. Laura gasped. I grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet. Move. We bolted for the door. Behind us, the shadow shrieked a high, unnatural sound that fractured into dozens of layered tones, none of them human. We cleared the porch just as something slammed into the side of the house, shaking the boards under our feet. Half running, half dragging Laura, I sprinted across the field. The horn sounded again, louder this time, echoing across the sky. And then, a figure stepped from the tree line, massive, antlered, crowned in shifting shadow and pale light. The land's ancient guardian, the one mentioned in Rule 6. Laura collapsed beside me as the ground trembled. It's the horned one, I whispered, but I didn't know if I said it in awe or fear. The horned one stepped fully into the moonlight, and the world seemed to contract around him. The trees bent subtly inward, as if pulled by gravity. The air rippled, vibrating against my skin with a pressure that made it difficult to breathe. Laura, still trembling on her knees, let out a low gasp and clutched my arm like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. He was taller than any living creature had a right to be, easily 7, maybe 8 feet, if you counted the antlers that branched like the topography of an ancient forest. His silhouette flickered at the edges, not blurring, but shifting as if his body existed slightly out of sync with the world around him. His steps were soundless, not soft, soundless. He crossed the grass without disturbing a single blade, his form casting no shadow, his presence radiating not menace but an overwhelming authority, a primordial weight that sank into my bones and made every instinct scream in conflicting directions. Dad had told me about him, whispered stories meant only for sons who inherited secrets older than our bloodline. Rule 6. Obey without question, submit without hesitation. Wait for the horned man if you ever lose your way. But no story had truly prepared me for what stood before us. Not even close. He stopped about 20 feet away, and his amber eyes glowing with a steady, ancient fire fell first on me, then slowly shifted to Laura. She whimpered under his gaze, her body folding inward. I moved closer to her without thinking, shielding her as best I could. The horned one tilted his head not in curiosity, but in recognition. You have broken the veil, he said, his voice deep enough to rattle my ribs. It wasn't spoken aloud. It vibrated through the air, through the ground, through my chest. The boundaries were tested tonight. The shadow creature in Laura's house screamed again, this time from the broken window behind us. Its outline twitched under the flickering porch light, stretching across the siding like dripping tar, desperate to escape the presence standing before it. The horned one raised a single branch-like arm. Silence. The command cracked like thunder. The shadow froze mid-writhe. Its screech choked off instantly, dissolving into a thin hiss before flattening against the wall completely. Like a child cowering under the reprimand of something vastly superior, Laura pressed her face into my shoulder, shaking violently. "What is that?" she whispered, voice raw with terror. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know if an answer even existed. The horned one turned his gaze fully on her. She flinched as though the look alone pressed her into the dirt. "She does not belong here," he said, not cruelly, but as a statement of ancient law. "And yet she is here." His glowing eyes shifted to me. "And you, young ward, have broken the first rule to interfere." My stomach plunged. I had expected anger, judgment, punishment, but his tone held none of that. It was more complicated, more disappointed. "I couldn't let her die," I said. I didn't know if bravery mattered, but honesty always had. He watched me with those impossible eyes. The night thickened, wrapped around us like a storm waiting to break. Dad appeared at the edge of our porch, then drawn, tight-lipped, breathless from running. But even he stopped short the moment he saw the horned one. His body bowed slightly, instinctively, in the way generations of men had bowed before him. "Ancient One," Dad said quietly, reverently. The horned one didn't turn toward him. His focus remained on me. "You were taught the rules," he said. "You were warned of the costs of breaking them." "I know," I whispered, "but the rules felt wrong tonight. They felt like chains instead of protection." The horned one's antlers flickered, shifting shape subtly, as if adjusting to better understand my words. "The rules are not chains," he said. "They are agreements, boundaries forged so both sides may endure." He stepped closer. Laura whimpered again, but I held my ground. "Yet you broke them," he continued. "Not out of defiance, not out of arrogance, but out of compassion." His voice softened on that word, though the air still vibrated with power. "That," he said, "is unprecedented." The shadow creature inside the house began inching upward again, testing the limits of its stillness. Its outline pulsed like a heartbeat, reaching toward the window frame. The horned one lifted his hand again. The air thickened. Enough. This time, the shadow didn't freeze. It collapsed. The shape lost all form, melting into a smear that evaporated into nothing. The porch light dimmed, as if relieved of a terrible burden. Laura looked up slowly, eyes wide, breath shaking. Horror and awe tangled together on her face. "What was that?" she whispered. "A breach," the horned one replied. "A starving one, drawn to your grief, drawn to your unanchored presence upon contested soil. You should have perished tonight." Laura flinched. "But you did not," he continued, "because he intervened." His gaze flicked to me again, and something ancient stirred in the air, something that felt like a shift in the fabric between our world and theirs. "This changes the balance," he said. Dad stepped forward, voice steady. "Ancient One, the rules still hold. We are ready to reaffirm them." The horned one's antlers shimmered, and for a moment I thought I saw entire forests inside them. Branches, roots, seasons changing. Time itself. "No," he said. Dad stiffened. "No?" The horned one's eyes glowed brighter. "A new agreement must be forged tonight." The air died in my lungs. "A bond extended," the horned one continued, "to include the outsider who now stands upon this land, who has survived its first test." Laura shook her head rapidly. I didn't survive anything. I don't want." "You lived," he said simply. "That is what matters." "I don't want to be part of this," she whispered. "I don't want any of this." The horned one lowered his head slightly, not sympathy, but understanding deeper than human emotion. "Want is irrelevant," he said. "The land has acknowledged you. It has marked you. You are part of this, whether you desire it or not." Laura's breathing quickened, panic rising like a tide. And then he turned to me. "You chose to protect her." "Yes," I said, my throat dry. "And because of that," he said, "you will share the burden of her survival." Dad inhaled sharply. "Ancient One, that." "Silence, Ward Father," he said without looking at him. Dad's mouth snapped shut. The horned one lifted his hand, placing 2 fingers more like roots against my forehead. My vision flickered white. Suddenly, I wasn't standing on Laura's lawn anymore. I was everywhere. I saw the land as he saw it, shimmering with ancient energy, alive with old pathways, pulsing with threats, and guardians and boundaries woven through centuries. I felt the forest breathing. I sensed the restless entities pacing their territories. I tasted the cold hunger of the thing that had tried to enter Laura's house. I saw Laura's life like a thread, bright, thin, fragile, and I saw mine intertwined with it. The vision broke. I staggered back, gasping, and Laura caught me instinctively, her trembling hands gripping my shoulders. "What did he do to you?" she whispered. The Horned One stood tall again. "A pact," he said. "A shared fate." Dad looked horrified. Laura looked terrified. I didn't know what to feel. The Horned One stepped back toward the woods. "By sunrise," he said, "the rules will rewrite themselves. Both of you must be ready." He paused one final time. "If you fail," he said, "the land will claim you both." Then he vanished into the tree-line, silent, enormous, impossible, and the night breathed again. Everything felt heavier. Everything felt changed, and nothing felt safe. Dawn didn't break that morning, it bled into the sky. A slow, muted wash of pale blue that felt more like recovery than sunrise. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that settles after a violent storm passes, but leaves the ground trembling from memory alone. I stood on our porch, arms braced on the railing, watching the horizon creep toward daylight as if the sun itself hesitated to return. Behind me, Dad paced the kitchen like a caged animal, boots scraping the wood floor, breath sharp, muttered words scraping out in fragments. I had heard him angry before. I had heard him afraid, but never both at once. "You shouldn't have stepped out that door," he said, voice cracking through the quiet like a whip. "You shouldn't have broken the rule. Now look what you've done." I didn't answer. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right in ways neither of us were ready to face. The pact. The Horned One's words still echoed in my skull, dim but relentless. Shared burden. Shared fate. The land will claim you both. My palms still tingled where he had touched me, and every so often a flicker of that impossible vision tremored behind my eyes, the forest breathing, the boundaries glowing like veins, the entities pacing in restless hunger. For the first time, I felt the land's pulse, and for the first time, it felt like it beat inside me. Dad came to stand beside me, his shoulders slumped with a weight he was trying and failing to hide. "You don't understand what he's done, Evan." I turned toward him slowly. "Then tell me." He pressed his lips together, every line of his face drawn taut. "He's bound you to her, you and the girl. That's what a shared fate means." I swallowed hard. "Bound how?" "Through responsibility," Dad said, voice low, almost reverent. "Through consequence. Through survival." He rubbed his jaw, avoiding my eyes. "Our family's been tied to this land for generations, tied by duty. But you," he exhaled, "you're tied by choice now, yours. And hers. I chose to save her. And now, the land expects you to keep choosing her," he said sharply. "Every day, every night, every time she steps too close to danger. If she dies," his jaw tightened, "if she fails, then the pact breaks, and the land claims us." I finished quietly. Dad nodded once. A cold wave rolled through me, settling in my ribs like ice. I looked toward the Merrick house across the field. Its windows were dark, no broken glass, no signs of the shadow creature that had nearly torn the building apart last night. The porch light flickered once, then steadied like it was recovering too. "Is she alive?" I asked. "Yes," Dad said, surprising me. "The Horned One wouldn't have bound her otherwise. He doesn't forge pacts with the dead." A twisted kind of relief spread through my chest, tangled with a dread I couldn't shake. "She'll be confused when she wakes," Dad continued. "Scared. Maybe broken. You need to give her space." But the memory of her trembling hands holding onto me, her wide, terrified eyes meeting mine in the flicker of collapsing shadows made something inside me harden. "I'm not leaving her alone today." Dad clenched his jaw again. "That's exactly what you should do." Before I could argue, A soft sound drifted across the field. A door creaking open. I turned sharply. The Merrick front door hung ajar. Laura stepped out slowly, sunlight hitting her like she wasn't sure what it would do to her. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, her clothes still ripped from where she'd fallen the night before. She held one hand pressed to her temple where the shadow creature had thrown her against the wall. But she was walking, alive, aware. Her eyes scanned the field, jittery and overstimulated until they found me. She froze. For a moment, the entire world shrank down to the distance between us. An invisible cord pulled taut, humming with something I didn't have words for. Dad exhaled sharply beside me, almost a growl. "Don't, Evan. Let her go back inside. Let her think. Let her breathe." But she didn't go back inside. She stepped forward, tentatively, one foot in the grass, then another. The sunlight caught her face, and I saw something I didn't expect: anger fighting with fear. A stubborn, burning will that refused to crumble even after everything she'd seen. She crossed half the field before stopping at the fence line, her breath uneven, her posture shaky but determined. Her voice, when it finally came, trembled with exhaustion but held steady with intent. "We need to talk." Dad tensed beside me, ready to intervene. I stepped down from the porch before he could. The grass brushed my boots, dew soaking through the leather with a cold bite that felt almost grounding. I reached the fence, stopping just shy of the boundary line. "You shouldn't be out here," I said gently. She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Last night, something tried to pull me through my own floorboards. I don't think being outside makes things worse at this point." "Fair." She wrapped her arms around herself, gripping tightly as if trying to hold something inside her chest together. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "What was that thing? What was he?" She didn't say the words, but I heard the unspoken part loud and clear. "What have I gotten myself into?" Before I could answer, her knees buckled. I lunged forward, catching her arms just in time. She stiffened at the contact, eyes wide, but she didn't pull away. Her breath shuddered, catching on whatever emotion she was barely keeping in check. "I didn't dream it," she whispered. "It was real, all of it." "Yes," I said softly. She swallowed hard, eyes searching mine. "And now I feel." Her voice trailed off as she pressed a hand to her chest, fingers trembling. "Different. Like something's inside me. Like the ground is humming. Like the air is thicker." "The pact," I said, her face drained of color. "What pact?" I hesitated, but lies held no power anymore. Not after what we survived. "You were marked," I said quietly. "Bound to the land, bound to the rules, and bound to me." Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in dawning comprehension. Horror mixed with something else, something unbearably human. "I didn't ask for that," she breathed. "I know. I don't want this. I know." She stared at me, voice cracking. "Can it be undone?" "No," I whispered. "Not without consequences." Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled around the fence post, white-knuckled. "Consequences like what?" I struggled for the right words. "How do you explain death without using the word? How do you warn without breaking someone already bent by terror?" "The land protects what it binds," I said finally. "And when that bond breaks, it protects itself instead." She closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in acceptance forged by fear. When she opened them again, they were wet but steady. "What happens now?" she whispered. The wind shifted, then a soft, deliberate breeze that swept across the field, brushing through the grass like fingers. "A sign, a summons, a warning. The rules will rewrite themselves," I said, "and you and I will have to learn them together." Her breath caught. "Together," she repeated softly. For the first time, the land didn't hum with threat. It hummed with expectation. The wind settled around us like it was listening, waiting to hear what we'd say next. Laura's fingers tightened around the fence post, knuckles pale as bone. The early morning sunlight washed over her face, revealing every bruise, every tear track that had dried on her cheeks, every tremor she tried and failed to hide. Behind me, I heard Dad walk down from the porch, His boots crunched through the gravel, slow, deliberate steps that carried the weight of duty more than the weight of a man. He stopped several paces behind me, watching, judging, measuring, but he didn't speak. I faced Laura fully, quietly resisting whatever lecture Dad was preparing behind me. "We'll figure this out," I promised. Her eyes flicked toward mine, cautious, distrustful, but desperate for something solid to hold on to. "You say that like you understand what the pact even means for me." She swallowed hard. I don't understand any of it." "I know," I said softly. "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice cracking. "You were raised here. You know the rules. You know the things that live in the forest. I didn't even know any of this existed until last night." She hugged herself tightly, shivering though the morning was warm. "And now you're telling me I'm connected to all of it? Bound to land I don't understand? Bound to you?" The last words came out fragile, almost fearful. Dad's boots shifted behind me. He didn't like her tone. He didn't like her implication. But he stayed silent. "For now, you're not bound to me," I said carefully. "Not in the way you're imagining." Her eyes narrowed. "Then in what way?" I hesitated. The truth was complicated, old, dangerous to speak aloud without the land listening, but she deserved honesty. "The pact means your survival is tied to this land now," I said quietly. "Its rules, its balance, its expectations. And because I intervened, it means I'm responsible for helping you learn what that actually looks like." She let out a strained laugh. "So I'm a liability?" "No," I said sharply. "You're a variable. And the land doesn't like variables. That's why we need to be careful." She stared at me for a long moment, chest rising and falling too fast. Her breathing was shallow, the first signs of panic creeping in like cracks. "Laura," I said gently. She didn't respond. "Laura." "Nothing." I reached out, lightly touching her arm. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Her skin was cold, too cold. "You're safe for now," I whispered. "Nothing can cross the boundary during daylight." Dad finally spoke, his voice gravelly, for now being the important part. I shot him a warning look, but he ignored it, stepping forward with the caution of a man approaching a wild animal. "You need to hear the truth," Dad said, standing on the other side of the fence but not crossing it. "The pact doesn't just bind you to the land, it binds the land to you. It will watch you. It will test you. It will measure whether you are worthy of standing here." She stared at him in horror. "Worthy? What does that mean? Like I'm taking a test I didn't sign up for?" "Most people fail," Dad said plainly. She swayed, and I caught her elbow to steady her. "Dad," I snapped. "Enough." He lifted his chin, nostrils flaring. "She deserves the truth, and it's better she hears it from us than from the forest." Laura pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "This is insane," she whispered. "I just wanted a fresh start. I just wanted somewhere quiet. I didn't ask for—" Her voice cracked. "I didn't ask for any of this." Her breathing sharpened fast, shallow, panicked. I moved closer, lowering my voice. "Take a breath." "I can't," she whispered. "Yes, you can. Look at me," I said, gently guiding her chin up. "Breathe with me." She did, slowly, haltingly, until her breath steadied enough to speak again. "What happens next?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "You rest," I said. "Eat, recover. Last night took a toll." She shook her head. "I can't go back inside that house." I didn't blame her. Dad frowned, a deep crease forming between his brows. "She can't stay on our land." "I know," I said. Laura looked between us. "What do you mean? I can't stay?" Dad spoke before I could. "This land recognizes you now. It'll let you cross the field. It might even let you stand near the fence. But if you stay too long on this side, it'll see it as you trying to merge territories." Laura blinked. "And that's bad?" Dad nodded once. "Very." She turned to me. "Then where am I supposed to go?" Her voice broke again, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion, pure, overwhelming exhaustion. I exhaled slowly. "You go back home," but not alone. Dad stiffened. Evan, I'm not letting her walk back into that house without protection, I said, cutting him off. This is how it starts, Dad warned. Interference leads to dependency. Dependency leads to violation. Violation leads to consequence. It already started, I snapped. Last night started it. The pact started it. There's no walking away now. Laura watched us like someone watching two strangers argue over her life, because that's exactly what was happening. Dad closed his eyes, jaw clenched. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its anger, replaced by something heavier. You're making choices for both of you now, he said. Be careful which ones you choose. He turned and walked back toward our house, leaving us alone at the fence. Laura wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to look stronger than she felt. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For causing all this? I shook my head. You didn't cause anything. You just arrived at the wrong time. She forced a weak smile. Story of my life. For a moment, we stood there in silence. The sun rose higher, brushing warmth across the field. The land felt awake, listening, waiting. You ready? I asked. For what? To go home, I said gently, and to face what the land shows you next. Her breath hitched, but she nodded. Only if you come with me. My pulse quickened. Not fear, not dread, something else. Something like the first moment of stepping into danger with purpose instead of panic. I will, I said. And as we walked across the field toward her house, toward the place where the pact had already begun reshaping her life, I realized the truth. She wasn't the only one the land was watching. It was watching me too. The walk across the field felt longer than it ever had before. The grass brushed against our legs, swaying gently in the morning breeze, yet every shift of wind carried an undercurrent of awareness. It felt like the land itself watched each step Laura took, measuring her, testing the new thread that now bound her to it. She walked close beside me, her breaths shallow but controlled. I stayed slightly ahead, one pace forward, not because I needed to lead her, but because some part of me felt compelled to shield her from whatever else the morning might bring. As we approached the Merrick house, the scars of last night became painfully clear. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. The porch railing was split. The window frames bore long, claw-like scrapes, marks of something that had not been made of flesh or bone. Laura stopped before climbing the porch steps, her hand hovering an inch above the wood as if expecting it to burn her. I can't believe I lived through this, she whispered, voice cracking from the weight of understatement. You didn't just live through it, I said softly. You survived it. That matters. She looked at me, her eyes tired but no longer vacant. The terror was still there, but layered now with something sharper resolve. Then tell me how to survive the next one, she said. It wasn't a plea, it was a demand. I nodded, and together we stepped inside. The smell hit first. Cold air mixed with something metallic. Not blood, something older, something that clung to the walls like residue from another world. The living room was a ruin of overturned furniture and fractured drywall. Not a single object sat in its rightful place. But the strangest part? The house felt dead. Not empty. Dead. Like whatever force had torn through it, had sucked out every ounce of warmth, leaving only a hollow shell. Laura noticed it too. She rubbed her arms, shivering. It's freezing in here. It won't be for long, I muttered. How do you know? I didn't want to tell her the truth, that now that she had been claimed, the land wouldn't allow this place to remain cold for her. It would adjust. It would accommodate. It would reshape itself around her presence. Because she belonged to it now. Instead, I said, daylight keeps them away. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Them. She whispered it like a wound. I pointed to the deepest gouge in the wall right near the hallway. Black residue clung to the plaster, almost like soot but thicker, more viscous. She backed up a step, breath stuttering. That's where it came from, where it tried to pull you under, I corrected gently, and where the boundary finally rejected it. She stared at the mark, gaze haunted. Why did it stop? Because he arrived, I said. The horned one. She twisted toward me, voice trembling. And he's real, yes. And he's not the worst of them. No, she exhaled a shuddering breath. Then tell me what exactly I'm bound to. I hesitated, but only briefly. You're bound to the land, I said. To its rules, to its balance, to its judgment. I didn't choose that. No, I said softly. But you survived long enough for the land to choose you. She closed her eyes, a tear sliding silently down her cheek. Why me? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Maybe the land saw something in her. Maybe the pact exploited weakness. Maybe the forest chose people who carried heavy grief, people who wandered too close to its hunger. But none of those answers would help her right now. Instead, I said, the pact doesn't just bind you, it protects you. And I'm part of that protection now. She opened her eyes slowly. And what if I don't want to be protected? Then the land will protect itself, I said quietly, and it won't care what happens to you in the process. Her breath caught, her shoulders stiffening as the weight of that truth hit her. I walked deeper into the house, Laura following closely. The air warmed by the second, unnaturally fast, eerily deliberate. She noticed it too. The house is changing, she murmured. Like it's adjusting. It is, I said. She touched the wall, her fingertips brushing the scars left behind. What happens if I leave? Pack my car and go. The pact follows, I said. Wherever you settle, the land will reach for you. The horned one will expect you to uphold the terms. Her hand fell away. So I'm trapped. You're bound, I corrected. That's different. Does it feel different? She asked bitterly. I shook my head. No, not at first. She turned toward me, eyes shining with a mix of anger, fear, and helplessness. Then why do you look so calm? I'm not calm, I said. I've just lived my entire life knowing what you learned in one night. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, quieter. Does it get easier? My breath froze. Dad always said guardianship never got easier. Only heavier, sharper, more demanding. But I wasn't going to repeat that. It gets clearer, I said. You learn what matters, who matters, and you learn the rules well enough to survive them. She considered that, her jaw tightening. And what are the rules for me? She asked. Not your family's rules, mine. I exhaled. Rule 1. Don't leave after dark. Rule 2. Don't acknowledge the knocking. Rule 3. Avoid the barn. Rule 4. Reject the suited man. Rule 5. Don't take from the forest. Rule 6. Stop and wait for guidance when lost. But the pact had rewritten itself. They weren't the same anymore. Your rules, I said, will reveal themselves one at a time. You'll feel them. In your gut. In the air. In the house itself. The land will teach you. That sounds like torture. It's survival. She sat on what remained of her couch, head in her hands. I just wanted a quiet home, a place to breathe again, and now I have to learn how to coexist with things I don't understand. You will, I said. And if I don't? She asked softly. Then the land will end the pact, I said, permanently. Her hands dropped, her eyes lifted. Something in her expression shifted not toward fear, but toward defiance. A spark. Faint, but alive. What if I don't want to do this alone? She asked suddenly. I froze. Dad's warning echoed in my mind. Interference leads to dependency. Dependency leads to violation. Violation leads to consequence. But looking at her shaking, small, stubborn, terrified, but still trying to stand tall, I knew something with absolute clarity. The land didn't bind us to separate paths. It bound us together. You won't, I said quietly. Not anymore. She looked at me with wide, exhausted eyes. Then teach me, she whispered. And the land, listening from every wall and beam and shadow, hummed in approval. The first sign that the rules had begun to rewrite themselves came before noon. I didn't notice it at first, not consciously. The shift was subtle, like when a familiar road feels different somehow. A turn too sharp, a shadow too long, a silence too exact. The kind of change you only recognize in hindsight, when you realize the world has been quietly rearranging itself around you. Laura noticed before I did. We were standing in what remained of her kitchen. The morning light filtered through the fractured window, casting thin, trembling lines across the floor. She traced a finger along the counter, exhaling a slow, steady breath, trying to steady herself. But then she froze. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand off the counter and stared at her fingertip. "Evan," she said softly. "Look." I stepped closer. A faint symbol like a fingerprint made of ember glowed on her skin, a tiny sigil, not carved, not burned, not placed, formed. As natural as breath, as undeniable as truth. My chest tightened. When did that appear? I don't know. I just touched the counter and felt something. Like the house recognized me. I took her hand gently, turning it toward the light. "This is new," I murmured. "This wasn't there earlier." She swallowed. "Is this part of the pact?" "It's part of the land acknowledging you," I said quietly. "Marking you as connected." She shook her head in disbelief. "It's like it branded me." "No." I looked up at her. "It claimed you." Her breath caught. Silence filled the space between us, thick, heavy, and electric. Then the air shifted again. A faint hum vibrated through the floorboards. The house seemed to exhale a slow, creaking breath that rolled down the hall like a wave. I felt the change ripple under my feet, a pulse of recognition. Rule changes always began like this. Something old giving way, something new taking shape. "What was that?" she whispered. "The first adjustment," I said. "The pact is setting new terms." "Terms for what?" "For everything." Her eyes widened. "Are we in danger?" "Not right this second," I said, "but the land doesn't rewrite rules for comfort. It rewrites them for survival." She let out a hollow laugh. "Great, that makes me feel so much better." I almost smiled. Almost. Before I could answer, we heard the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on gravel outside. Dad. But he wasn't alone. I felt it before he even reached the porch. A presence behind him lighter than the entities from last night, but not human either. The air pressed inward, and the faint hum under the floorboards sharpened into a focused vibration. Laura moved closer to me instinctively, not because she saw the danger, but because she felt it. A new instinct, fast and precise, gifted by the pact. A shadow stretched across the doorway, too tall to be Dad's alone. The silhouette that followed him inside the broken entryway was slender, with limbs a little too long, hair falling like a dark curtain that swallowed the light behind it. Not the knocking woman, her shape was familiar and rigid. This was something else. Its movements were fluid, graceful, but wrong in a way that tugged at the edges of comprehension, like a reflection that blinked a half-second too late. Dad didn't look back, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the thing at his shoulder. He walked straight forward and stopped 3 feet away from us. He looked older than he had last night, older than I'd ever seen him. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed with a quiet storm brewing underneath. "The land sent an emissary," he said calmly, "because the pact has begun updating." Laura took a step back, pulse spiking. "That thing followed you." Dad nodded. "It's here to explain the new terms." "I don't want it in my house," she whispered harshly. "You don't get to choose," Dad said gently but firmly. "Not anymore." Her face paled. She looked at me, anger sparking through the fear. "Does he ever stop talking like that?" "No," I said. "But he's not wrong." The emissary stepped forward. Its feet didn't touch the ground. It hovered an inch above the floor, gliding like a shadow sliding across ice. As it entered the room, the temperature dipped, just a fraction but enough to feel like a warning. When it spoke, its voice sounded layered as if several voices had been woven together and pushed through one strained whisper. "Bound one," it said, facing Laura, and Ward blood turning to me. The compact shifts. Laura gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Can it talk like a normal person?" "No," Dad said. The emissary continued, unbothered. "Rule 1 has rewritten The floor vibrated in a low hum. I stiffened. Already? Yes. Laura's voice shook. What does it mean? The emissary tilted its head, its hair swaying unnaturally. You must not cross each other's thresholds after dusk. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not how the rule used to work, I said. The emissary blinked, or the shadow of a blink rippled through its form. The old rule governed your household alone. The new rule governs the connected pair. Laura stared at me, eyes wide. We can't cross property lines after dark? No, I said slowly, processing. We can't enter each other's homes, not once the sun sets. Why? She demanded. The emissary answered immediately. Crossing thresholds merges territories under the pact. Merged territories attract them. My stomach twisted. Who is them? Laura asked. Dad inhaled sharply. The unbound. The emissary nodded. Those who do not adhere to rules. Those who wait beyond the tree line. Those who hunger. I stepped in front of Laura instinctively, blocking her from the emissary's direct gaze. What else has changed? I asked. The emissary's body flickered light, bending around it as if the room struggled to contain its shape. Rule 2, it said. No response to the knocking unless both bound and ward speak as one. My chest tightened. That's new, I whispered. That's dangerous, Dad muttered. Laura blinked rapidly. Why would we ever need to respond to the knocking woman? You won't, I said firmly. The emissary drifted closer. Laura stepped back until she hit the wall. Rule 3, it whispered, is now shared. The barn, once forbidden to the ward, must remain sealed to the bound. Laura frowned. I wasn't planning on going into your barn anyway. You don't understand, Dad said. The barn isn't dangerous because of what's inside it. It's dangerous because of what it keeps out. The emissary nodded again, its hair lifting in an unseen current. The boundaries shift, the pact grows, the land watches. Then, its shape began to unravel. Dark strands peeled away like smoke drifting from a candle flame. Its form collapsed inward, folding itself into nothing. And then it was gone. No sound, no warning, no trace. Laura didn't breathe for several seconds. When she finally did, it came out in a sharp gasp. Evan, she whispered, I don't think I can do this. I stepped closer. You already did, I said quietly. Last night, you survived the worst the land could throw at a newcomer. The rest, we learn. She looked up at me with something fragile and desperate, flickering behind her eyes. Then teach me again, she said. Today, tomorrow, however long it takes. And as the hum of new rules settled into the bones of the house, into the land, into her, into me, I knew this was only the beginning. The emissary's departure left the house unnaturally still, so still that the silence seemed to press inward, filling every broken floorboard, every splintered beam, every breath Laura took. She leaned against the wall, as if her legs had forgotten how to support her. I didn't touch her, not yet. The new rules were fresh, too fresh, and the land didn't like hesitation or blurred intentions. Dad exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face like he was trying to erase the last 5 minutes. Well, he muttered, that could have gone worse. Laura turned toward him sharply, her voice raw. Worse? That thing floated through my doorway like it was stepping out of a nightmare, rewrote the house rules of my life, and then evaporated into the air. How could it possibly have gone worse? Dad raised an eyebrow. It could have stayed. She froze, went pale, and suddenly understood. The emissary wasn't a threat. It was a courtesy, an instruction, not an attack, an explanation, not a punishment. But the things it mentioned, the unbound, the hungry ones, the creatures who watched the threshold line, those were the ones we kept out. And the ones who would have entered without warning or permission. Laura swallowed hard. What happens if I break the new rules? Dad didn't sugarcoat. He never did. You won't get a second warning. Meaning the land will handle it. Her eyes flicked to me, wide and searching. Is that true? Yes, I said quietly. But we'll make sure that doesn't happen. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, grounding herself the way someone does when they know panic won't help them survive. When she opened them again, The fear was still there, but something steadier anchored beneath it. Resolve. We need to go through the rules, she said. All of them. Slowly, carefully. I need to understand exactly what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do. Dad nodded. Good. That's the attitude that'll keep you alive. She gave him a deadpan stare. I'm so glad we're all in agreement about my survival strategy. I couldn't help it. I let out a tiny laugh. A real one. Not because anything about this situation was funny, but because she was still fighting, still refusing to fold. That mattered more than she knew. All right, I said. Let's start from the beginning. We moved into what had once been her dining room. The table was flipped on its side. Legs snapped, plates shattered. The morning light from the broken windows cast long, fractured shadows. Dad stayed back, leaning against the doorway like a sentinel. He wasn't intruding. He was guarding, observing, judging the boundaries of this new whatever we were. Bound and ward. Pact-bound pair. Connected by something older than both of us. I sat on an overturned chair. Laura sat on the edge of the collapsed couch, facing me. Her posture was stiff, like she wasn't sure whether sitting near me broke any rules. It's fine, I said gently. Daylight isn't restricted. Good, because I'm honestly 2 seconds from passing out. I can tell, I said. She exhaled shakily. Let's start with the new Rule 1. I nodded. Rule 1. We can't cross each other's thresholds after dusk. She rubbed her temple. Meaning you can't enter my house. And you can't enter mine. Her eyes narrowed. Even if one of us is in danger. I hesitated. Dad answered. Especially then, he said. The land will interpret threshold crossing as attempted territory merge. Merge is deadly. Attraction, convergence, entities arriving from every direction. So, she said, if I'm screaming for help and trapped behind my front door, you don't scream, Dad said. You don't run. You follow Rule 6 instead. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Wait for him. I nodded. She stared at the floor, absorbing that. It was a hard truth to accept that after dark, her survival depended less on action and more on stillness. But that was the land. It punished movement. It hunted fear. Rule 2, I said gently. The knocking. Her breath hitched. I heard it last night. Something knocked on my wall before everything went insane. Dad stiffened. The knocker tests new boundaries first. Fantastic, she whispered. What does Rule 2 actually mean? It means you never answer, I said. Not alone, not ever. But if the land rewrites the rule, so that you and I must respond together, only together, then someday we might have to speak as one. She frowned. Speak what? I shook my head. We won't know until the rule reveals it. That's just cruel, she muttered. That's just the pact, Dad corrected. She blew out a breath. Rule 3 was about the barn. I nodded. You don't go near it. Not during the day, not at night. Not unless the Horned One calls you. That's his territory, his archive. Archive? She repeated. It holds the journals, the records, the entire history of our family's guardianship, and also, Dad added, the exact boundaries of their prison. A shiver ran through her. What happens if I enter it? You'll draw everything to you, Dad said bluntly. Barns hold edges. Edges attract watchers. You don't want watchers. She pulled her knees up, hugging them lightly. Are these rules permanent? No, I said. They change with the land. Change with us. That's why the emissary came to deliver the first wave. She looked up sharply. First wave? Dad nodded. The pact rarely changes one rule at a time. It shifts in sequences. Phases. Laura stared at us like she wanted to throw up. Why didn't you mention that earlier? Because it wouldn't have helped, Dad said. You needed to hear the rules before you learned how unstable they can be. I shot him a warning look, but he didn't care. He pushed off the doorway and stepped into the room, not crossing any boundary, just moving closer to observe Laura with a level intensity that made her straighten. Listen carefully, he said. The land isn't just watching you, it's learning you. She blinked. Learning me? Yes, he said. It needs to determine what you are. A partner to the ward, a liability, a threat, or a contender. Her face drained of color. Contender for what? Dad's eyes darkened. For your place among us. A long, heavy silence followed. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice thin but steady. Then let it watch, she said. Let it learn. I'm not going anywhere. Her defiance wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it carried the quiet weight of someone who had been broken before and refused to be broken now. The land felt it too. The house hummed. The air warmed. And somewhere beyond the tree line, something stirred. Something shifted outside. At first, it was only a pressure in the air, subtle, like the low hum before thunder rolls across distant hills. But then the house reacted. A faint creak ran up the wallboards, windows tightening in their frames as though bracing. The light from the broken window dimmed for half a heartbeat, shadows stretching long and thin across the hallway before snapping back to their normal positions. Laura stiffened. What was that? The land acknowledging your answer, I said quietly. Dad stepped closer toward the door, his eyes scanning the tree line. Or the land testing it. Laura's fingers clenched the torn fabric of her jeans. Testing me? Already. Dad didn't look back. The pact doesn't wait. It measures you from the moment you accept its terms. She swallowed hard, voice trembling. I didn't accept anything. You survived, he said. That was your acceptance. She opened her mouth to argue, but the floor groaned beneath us, not from weight, but from response. The wood fibers tightened, as if listening. The house wasn't just reacting to the land. It was reacting to her words. Careful, I warned softly. It hears doubt too. The silence that followed was tight, every breath too loud, every heartbeat too sharp. Laura moved her hands slowly into her lap, grounding herself before speaking again. So what happens now? What else is going to change? Dad crossed his arms. Rule changes tend to come in sets of 3. Meaning? That wasn't the last, I finished. Laura's shoulders sagged. Perfect. More nightmare updates on the way. But despite her sarcasm, I saw something new settle into her posture, a readiness. Or maybe stubborn refusal to be undone again. She looked at me. If the rules rewrite themselves because of me, doesn't that mean I'm dangerous? Dad answered before I could. Not dangerous, volatile. That's not better, she whispered. I shook my head. It just means the land hasn't figured you out yet. Newcomers change things. But pact-bound newcomers? I glanced toward the broken window. They change everything. Another silence, this one quieter, heavier, filled with unspoken questions too large to fit into a single morning. Then Laura raised her head. You said earlier that the land will send more signs, more rules. How exactly will we know when another change happens? I didn't want to tell her the truth, but withholding information from someone bound to the pact was worse than lying to a free person. You'll feel it, I said. First in your skin, then in your ears, like a pressure shift. Then the house will echo it. She rubbed her arms, like what just happened. Exactly like that. And if I ignore it? Dad looked at her sharply. You don't. She flinched. He softened his voice barely. Ignoring a rule change is like ignoring a warning from a storm siren. You don't survive the mistake. Laura nodded slowly, trying to take in more than anyone should be expected to absorb in one day. She shifted forward on the couch, elbows on her knees, hair falling forward like a curtain. All right, she whispered. Then let's finish the list. I took a breath. Rule 4 used to be about the man in the suit. Laura's face paled instantly. Don't tell me he's still a rule. He's more than a rule, Dad said. He's one of the old bound ones. Literal contract incarnate. You avoid him at all costs. But now that the rules are changing, I continued, he might test your boundaries. Not physically, but through presence. He'll try to speak to you. Try to negotiate. Don't let him, Dad added. He wins every negotiation he starts. Her voice cracked. He was in my yard last night. Dad nodded grimly. And he'll come back. She looked like she might be sick. And if I tell him to leave, he'll go? Not because you told him, I said. Because the land will enforce your words, but only if you say them with the pact behind you. And how do I know if it's behind me? You'll feel it, I said. A pull, like the wind aligning. You'll know. She closed her eyes. Okay, what's Rule 5 now? I hesitated. Dad didn't. The woods, he said. Do not enter, do not cut, do not take, not even a leaf. Laura frowned. But I'm bound to the land now. Wouldn't the forest recognize me? It would, Dad said. That's the problem. Her voice thinned. Meaning? The unbound leave deeper in the woods, I explained gently. They've been waiting for a reason to step beyond the old perimeter. Because the pact expanded to include you, the forest will test your presence personally. She stared at the tree line through the shattered window. Test me how? By calling to you, Dad said. Whispers, shapes, lights, whatever it thinks will draw you in. It will tempt you, I added. Make you think it's safe. Make you think you belong there. Do I? No, Dad said firmly. Not yet, and not until the Horned One says otherwise. Another silence. Then she whispered, What about Rule 6? That one gave me pause. Rule 6 had always been the most mysterious, the most final, the last line of survival. If you ever get lost, I recited, or if the supernatural crosses into your senses, stop, stay still, and wait for the Horned One. Dad nodded. That rule stays the same for both of you, but it applies more broadly now. How broadly? Laura asked. Any situation, I said. Any moment you feel the shift. Any time the air bends or the trees breathe or your name echoes in your own head, stop. Do not run. Running invites the chase, Dad said. Her breath shuddered. And what if he doesn't come? He will, I said. If the pact holds, he will. She looked at the floor for a long time. Then slowly, deliberately, she stood. Her legs shook. Her breath wavered. But she stood. I want to see the boundary, she said quietly. I blinked. Now? Yes. She met my eyes. If I'm part of this land now, I want to see its edge. Dad stiffened. That's not a good idea. It's daylight, she said. You said daylight keeps the unbound away. I need to know where my limits are. Dad looked at her for a long moment, measuring the fire behind her words. Then he turned to me. She's your responsibility. I know. And the land is watching. I know. And one mistake. I know, Dad. He stepped back, jaw tight. Then go, but don't cross the tree line, not even by an inch. Laura nodded firmly. I won't. I walked to her side. Her breath steadied, and together we stepped out of the broken house toward the forest that was already adjusting its shadows for her arrival. This wasn't the end of the rules. This was only the beginning. The forest was quiet that evening. Not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that feels intentional, as if the world is holding its breath, waiting for someone to decide what comes next. Laura stood beside me at the edge of the tree line, the last streaks of daylight fading across her bruised cheek. Even exhausted, even terrified, she held herself upright with a strength the land seemed to recognize and respect. For the first time since the pact bound us, the boundary didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a choice. And choices, out here, are as powerful as blood. She stared into the dim forest, voice trembling in that fragile, brave way she had. Do you ever stop being afraid of all this? No, I said honestly. But you learn when to listen to the fear and when to walk with it. She nodded slowly, as though she finally understood something no one had explained to her, something she'd only learned by surviving. Then she whispered, Do you think the land meant to choose me, or was I just an accident in its way? I turned toward her, and for the first time, I saw her not as the girl who stumbled into our rules, or the outsider who nearly died her first night, or the person I was suddenly responsible for. I saw her as the land saw her, someone fractured, but unbroken, someone terrified, but unyielding, someone who kept standing, even when the darkness told her to fall. You weren't an accident, I said. The land doesn't choose by mistake. She met my eyes, and for the first time, I felt the pact not as a weight, but as a connection, a living thread between us, humming with something old and patient. Behind us, the house creaked softly, as if shifting into its new shape. Ahead of us, the forest exhaled, its shadows settling. The night accepted us. The pact accepted her, and maybe, in a strange way I didn't yet understand, I accepted her too. She took one last breath of daylight before stepping back toward her house and whispered, "Then I guess I'm staying." The wind stirred through the branches, gentle, approving, almost grateful. And as the darkness rose from the ground like a tide, swallowing the last trace of sun, I realized something. The rules hadn't been rewritten to trap us. They'd been rewritten to test us, to see if we could rise to the responsibility of guarding a world most people would never know existed, and protecting each other along the way. The land would try us again. The creatures would watch us again. The Horned One would return sooner than either of us wanted. But for the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time, the land felt less like a burden, and more like a truth I was ready to protect. Whatever comes next, the knocking, the watchers, the darkness that tests every crack in our resolve, we'll meet it together. Because out here on this isolated land, survival isn't about strength. It's about understanding the rules, honoring the pact, and choosing to stay, even when staying means stepping into the unknown, even when the unknown is already watching.